Good morning. My name is Stella Natufe, and I work for the City of Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection. Welcome to the BACP Business Education Workshop webinar series. We have adapted our regular business education workshops at City Hall into these webinars until further notice. I want to inform you that business licenses can be processed online by visiting chicagobusinessdirect.org. All BACP offices are open to limited members of the public. Please be advised that masks are required in all BACP facilities and 6 feet of social distancing must be maintained at all times. While our offices are open to the public, we continue to strongly discourage in-person visits. Please visit chicago.gov/BACP for more information. If you are a part of the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program, you can get credit for joining this webinar by sending an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. If you want to learn more about this program, please visit chicago.gov/business education. To help guide your business and employees during Chicago's reopening process, please visit chicago.gov/reopening. Also, BACP and the City of Chicago's Office of Emergency Management and Communications created ShyBiz Emergency Alerts. You can opt in to receive targeted emergency alerts for the business community. If you are interested, please visit chicago.gov/ShyBiz Alerts. We like to encourage all of our attendees to please ask questions. Please use the chat box and send your questions to all panelists. There will be a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. Today's webinar is entitled Introduction to Exporting, presented by the CBDC of Illinois. At this time, I will now turn this webinar over to Ms. Alyssa for us to begin.
Thank you, Stella, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Alyssa Swartzer, and welcome to today's webinar, Introduction to Exporting. Like I said, my name is Alyssa Swartzer. I am the International Trade Center Director at the Greater Southwest Development Corporation, as well as with the state of Illinois. So the state of Illinois has 10 ITC or International Trade Centers throughout the state, and we are created to essentially help small local businesses grow their exports and enter new foreign markets. So we provide one-on-one business counseling, international market research, and planning, and then informational trainings and webinars such as today's presentation. Today I'll be going over a very high-level overview of the export process and why it's a good option to consider when looking to grow and expand your business. We'll be going through, some Illinois trade information, risks and benefits, and some resources that are available to you through the city, local, and state government. Before we move on, I just also wanted to quickly mention the nonprofit that I'm hosted at, the Greater Southwest Development Corporation. Like I said, we are 10 throughout the state of Illinois, and I service the southwest side of Chicago. Here at the Greater Southwest Development Corporation, we're a community development agency, so we look to improve the quality of life for those in the southwest side of Chicago. We do that through owning and operating senior care facilities, work on real estate development over on the southwest side, and then provide one-on-one types of business counseling, whether that be small business development counseling. We have one for procurement technical assistance, getting your business license as well, and then my center, the International Trade Center, to help businesses, like I said, grow their exports. So moving on, just a quick rundown of today's agenda I briefly mentioned before. So we'll kind of walk you through the benefits and risks of getting into exporting and what that means for your business. And then we will go through what it means to create a export plan, kind of highlighting the main points throughout. So that entails export readiness, market entry options, different payment methods that go into international sale negotiations, different modes of transportation, export documentation, and then we'll go over some of the resources that are available. We'll focus more on government-funded resources. Obviously, there are a huge amount of different sources that come from different private companies that can help facilitate this, but we're going to focus on government resources. They tend to favor and are geared more towards smaller businesses, and most are provided at no cost to you. So, and then like Stella had mentioned at the end, we will have a Q&A. So if anything sparks your interest or something you're looking to get more information on, please put it in the chat. We'll have some time to go over it. And then as always, if there's something more specific to your business, I'll also have my contact information, and we can also set up a time to meet one-on-one and kind of discuss further as it pertains to your business. So moving on. So just some quick Illinois international trade information. This last year, Illinois placed 5th among the 50 states and #1 in the Midwest in total exports shipped out over the last year, which totaled out to be $53 billion worth of international shipments. 90% of that, of the Illinois exporters are small and medium-sized businesses, and they account for over 25% of the total exports. And in 2020, the top countries that we had sent shipments to were Canada, Mexico, Germany, Australia, China, Brazil, the UK, and Japan. And we are really set as a state export assistance program to kind of facilitate those trade in those areas. Our state office, the Office of Trade and Investment, has 6 offices around the globe in China, Japan, Mexico, Canada, Belgium, and Israel to kind of service all the main areas that we see patterns of high shipments from Illinois exporters, and they are there to specifically help Illinois exporters make those transactions. And then lastly, exporting significantly can grow businesses' bottom line. Companies that are 17% more profitable than those who don't. And we'll kind of get into that more in this next slide, but basically just having the more demand coming in, the more purchase power from all the foreign markets, you see a more steady income of purchase orders and things like that. Exporters are, I think around 9% less likely to go out of business than those who don't. So it's just something to consider when considering exporting. So why export? Obviously, this is the question you're probably asking and why you're here today. And so these are some of the main reasons. I just wanted to touch a bit on why it's beneficial for you as an exporter to sell your goods abroad. So first we have risk mitigation. So if you have operations abroad and sales revenue coming in from different markets, you're less susceptible to the political or economic downfalls that come into the domestic market. So you're essentially diversifying where your sales are coming from and therefore mitigating that risk of if something were to happen here in the US that could deter your sales and things like that. There's also a benefit, especially a good example is for businesses that run on a seasonal model, right? So for example, if you make ski gear, in the US, your peak season is in the winter months, obviously when it's time to, there's snow on the ground and there's time for skiing and things like that. And then the rest of the year is kind of banking on that peak season to kind of keep you operational until the next year. But if you were to expand your sales, right, to say South America, where their winter is our summer and our summer is their winter, you have another peak season for you in our summer months, and it kind of mitigates that risk of only depending on one huge sales flow during those winter months and kind of have a more steady flow of revenue. So yeah, and that kind of leads into the next one. So global market potential, as I mentioned, you're just more open to all the purchasing power of the entire world. I think statistically around 95% of the world's consumers live outside the US. So, if you're only exporting domestically, you're only reaching about 5% of the potential world's customers. So you could be missing out on a huge market. Not only the amount of people, but just in that market, you might have a different advantage, coming as an American product. Sorry, one moment. Sorry about that. But yeah, so for global market potential, it is a huge opportunity for you. Only like 60% of exporters sell into just one market, and that could just mean higher profits, more opportunity, more competitiveness, just given your brand, etc. And which also leads to the next one as profitability. So obviously, if your product is reaching more consumers and reaching out to more markets, you have a more potential to have higher profits, and that will increase. Also, in the sense of the increased amount of purchase orders and things like that, you can benefit from economies of scale. And for those who don't know what that means, economy of scale is just the cost savings you get from producing more in bulk at higher volumes. This is something that even smaller, medium-sized businesses can take advantage of. I think a lot of people think that this is something that is just for, larger corporations, but that's really not the case. So in the sense that you're producing more, you'll be more efficient and saving costs in that way as well. And then kind of what I touched on before, the resource availability, especially here in Illinois, we have a very large and extensive export assistance trade network. So, like I said, there's 10 of us ITCs on the ground meeting with businesses in person, but we also have our state office of trade and investment, and the whole commercial service network on the federal level. So there's just a huge amount of resources available to you, and a lot of them are provided at little to no cost. And so it's advantageous for you to, get ahead and get involved with those resources. We'll touch a little bit more about them later on, so I won't get too much into it right now. But just know, because I know a lot of exporters, kind of are intimidated for the first time exporters at the process and everything, but there is usually some sort of resource that can help you through every step of the process. So yeah. And with the benefits, there's also, a need to go over the risks that come with exporting, why it's so complex, and why people kind of seem intimidated at first, like I had mentioned. But really, it's just a matter of, doing your research and being aware of what is needed to successfully export in every step of the process, and taking precautionary measures to make sure that those are handled correctly. So just being aware of them, is something that is basically half the battle. So we'll just go through some of the main risks and go from there. So first we have financial risk. So obviously when you're dealing with foreign customers, there's a kind of heightened financial risk. If they're going to pay, you don't know how their banking system, how they do business over there works. So the risk of non-payment is substantial. So how are you going to make sure that what you're sending over is going to be received and you will receive payment in the end? We'll talk about export credit insurance and things like that, but just being aware of who your customers are, who you're dealing with. And then, like we said, export credit risk. And especially if you're in a foreign market that doesn't use a common currency, knowing the exchange rates, having that, really defined in your sales contract to know how you'll be getting paid and when. Exchange rates are always fluctuating at any time. So just being aware of that is super important. Transportation and logistical risks. So obviously you will be sending your goods farther than before. So thinking about how is the best way to send it without fear of, theft or the minimal damage to your good, things like that. We have to talk about Incoterms, which we'll get into later as well, but they're essentially, commercial terms of trade, kind of dictating who is responsible for those goods at what point in the journey, from the time that your product leaves your warehouse to the shipping dock of wherever it's going, and on the way and arriving to the port of entry at the new destination. Who's going to be bearing those costs and who's going to be paying those fees? That's something that you need to consider. And just to make sure that, again, those things are covered and you have a plan if something were to happen to those goods, like insurance or things like that. So legal risks, we have things to consider such as trademark and patents, intellectual property rights. So just because your product is patented and have those things here in the US, that doesn't mean it necessarily applies abroad. So making sure that you're going through and doing research on the market that you're considering, and looking at what needs to be done with their patent office to make sure that your goods are protected as soon as they arrive in that new market. And then political and cultural risks. It's something that I think we are taking, obviously, as you know, as you operate here in the US, you're always aware of like what's happening here in your local market and where you're living. But that kind of comes, you know, sort of naturally as you are a citizen of this country and you're living here. When you do business with the foreign market, it is also important to take in consideration their environment and, you know, is it politically stable? Is there any civil unrest? How are you going to deal with the language and cultural barriers of your foreign customers? It's not just a one size fits all. So again, kind of doing that research up front and making sure you understand very well that market that you're entering before you get into it. Obviously, if a country right now is going through, you know, some political instability and there's a shutdown of the government, you know, you might not want to do business with them at that point because, you know, businesses could be shut down due to the civil unrest. Your goods arrive, there's no one there to receive your goods, there's no way to get the payment out. So just being aware of the scenario of where you're sending your goods is also super important. And then just in exporting in general, I think that, you know, like I had mentioned, exporters, first-time exporters are kind of intimidated, but they think it's too risky, it's too complicated. But, you know, as globalization has, you know, ramped up in these past, even more so in these past 2 years due to the pandemic, it's become very standard in most businesses. It's just as easy as, and you know, especially if markets that are close to us that we're very used to, like Canada and Mexico, it's pretty much streamlined to a point where it's similar to exporting within the US. Again, it's just being aware of those steps that you need to take to mitigate those risks. Okay, so now that we've gone through sort of the benefits and risks of getting into exporting, I wanted to highlight sort of the export process and, you know, looking at what step by step what needs to be done in order to successfully export your goods abroad. And we're going to touch into some of them specifically more in these next slides. So again, we're just going to do a quick overview of the whole process as a whole. We'll start with, you know, assessing your export readiness. So usually first-time exporters are businesses that have kind of saturated their market here in the US. They're kind of maturing as a business. They're looking for ways to grow and trying to find different avenues that fit for their business model. So really taking a self-reflection of your business and looking at, you know, what products are doing well. Is there any sort of demand coming from other markets, from, you know, online inquiries or, you know, trade shows or things like that, and kind of taking that all into consideration, kind of putting that into the context of your management and your situation and what you're capable of and the bandwidth you have to expand sales, you know, X% if you were to enter X market. And then after that, we start, you know, seeing that we have some sort of potential in maybe South America or Europe, and then we kind of dig more deep and we go into international market research. So which countries would be the most lucrative for your good or service? You know, if you think that there is some potential in China, where in China, really try to hone in a specific demographic and region to ensure that, you know, all this time and effort that you're going to be putting in and investment that you're going to be putting into this endeavor, it'll be, you know, worth it and be the most efficient and effective as possible. So really try to hone in on a demographic, you know, what's the socioeconomic status of your target market? Where are they generally located? Where do they shop? You know, who are the competitors in this foreign market? Really dig deep into the profile, basically. And just really make sure you have a good idea before you start to develop your export plan. So the export plan is pretty much the business plan that you did when you first started your business, but now it's in the context of, you know, this foreign market, rethinking about how you're going to strategize marketing, your product profile. Are you going to just have, you know, all of your products right away, or just hone in on the top sellers? You know, the top seller in the US market might not be the top seller in this foreign market that you're thinking of. So trying to think about that as well. How will you price things? How are you going to sell? Are you going to sell through a distributor or directly to the consumer? And kind of take that all into consideration. And it's really important to, you know, have that written down and have that be something that you can visualize and kind of track and mark your metrics and things like that. Once all that is done, so the first stages are more of planning and development, and then you can move on to actually, making those negotiations and sales, going out and meeting potential clients, attending more trade shows, getting to find actual customers in those foreign markets, and then kind of working out those sales terms, how you're going to go about selling the shipment, who's going to be responsible, talking about Incoterms again, what are those trade terms and how are you going to allocate the responsibility from the shipment of goods, and how does that factor into, the price point and how you're going to go about making your margins in that sense. So yeah, just being very much aware and of the process and making sure that you're going through everything that needs to be done on that side. Because once the sale's made, you have to worry about other things such as regulations and compliance. So, on the US side, we have certain embargoes and certain buyers that you can't sell to. So being aware of not only what you're selling, but who you're selling to, where you're selling to, and what's the end use of your product. So again, having that go into the negotiations and sales of your products and service, because again, we have some certain embargoes and some licensing requirements from the U.S. on the U.S. side to get your goods eligible to leave the country. Making sure you comply, you don't face any fees or things like that. And then on the other side, so those are all the things to consider to get your products and services out of the US, but you also have to consider what is needed to get your product into the new country. So once your product has made it to the port of entry, they will face custom clearance and go through all of that kind of vetting. And so again, making sure that you comply with their licensing requirements. You have all the information that is needed for them to process everything. For the buyer, usually you create the shipment, you have the movement of goods, and then the clearance and delivery. So that's just something to take into consideration. And then, a lot of times once that's passed through and your goods have made it to the buyer and you've received payment, a lot of times people think that, that's all you need to do. But that's typically not the case. There is some sort of post-sale service that goes into that. Global consumers are very interested in purchasing U.S. products and service because we have, kind of the fame of being, high quality products. We're really known to be popular for that reason. And because of that, that does sort of imply some sort of extra thought in how people are going to be using your product in the end. So what are the return policies? Are there any installation services that you need to implement, and how are you going to translate that over into a foreign market? These are all things that you still need to consider to kind of maintain that sort of top quality branding of like US products abroad. So that's always something to consider. And especially if you want to have, a long-term relationship with these buyers, it's important to maintain, good business practices so that, you can continue. And this can be something that is part of your long-term plan as a business. So now we're going to dig a little deeper into some of the certain aspects that we had just talked about. And we're going to start here with export readiness. So again, just assessing the capabilities and the motivation for exporting. This is more of the, self-reflecting phase. There's a ton of different templates and tools online through, the U.S. Department of Commerce, the SBA. We have a lot of different templates that kind of help you walk you through each thing you need to consider when you're assessing, are you export ready? So first thing starts, with your product. Do you have a product that has demand in foreign markets? And how sure are you on that demand? Are you seeing, any demand, any traffic coming in on your online website from foreign markets? Are you getting any inquiries and emails from certain places? Just because something is successful here in the US doesn't necessarily mean that they will be successful abroad. So kind of thinking of the functionality of your product in a different market in that sense. Leadership commitment. I think this one is often said to be the most overlooked and one of the most important. So just making sure that your management team and those higher up in business are aware of the time and resources that are going to be needed to successfully export, this is more than likely going to be a long-term business plan, a part of your long-term business plan once you get started. So making sure that it's something that can be incorporated into your business for the long run. Are they willing to spend that time and money and investment in this endeavor? Because it is something, again, that's that is part of your business after that point. So that's leadership commitment. And then kind of what we've been going through, the knowledge of all these different aspects that you need to now take into consideration that apply when shipping your goods abroad, the market regulations in the foreign market, compliance with the U.S. government, as well as customs at the point of destination for your goods, the different payment methods. So how are you going to get paid? How are you going to ensure that your goods are covered if they were to default in a foreign country? What are the logistical things that need to be considered when transporting your good, not only by road, but possibly, through sea or by air? Like, what are those new logistic things that need to be taken care of? Are you working with a freight forwarder? What are they taking care of, and what are you responsible for? And then internally, again, kind of doing more of that self-reflecting. Do you have the capability and the capacity to maintain an efficient, effective business if your sales were to increase by 20%? Do you have the space for that extra volume? Do you have the bandwidth in terms, if you're in manufacturing, do you have the space, the physical space to do that? Product modification is also something to take into consideration. Like I said, this isn't just a one size fits all. And, especially when you're taking into consideration cultural aspects, language barriers, how customers may use your product in that market. What can be done on your side of things to make your product more usable, more wanted in that market? Is there something that you can tweak that could make it more profitable there? And are you able to do that at a high scale in terms of manufacturing and things like that? So again, just something to consider. And then resources. So are you aware of all the resources that you have available to you as an Illinois business? Really make sure that you're aware of everything that you could take advantage of, because that can really save you a lot of money in the end. For example, we'll talk about this later, but there's a grant program for Illinois businesses to participate in certain trade expansion activities, and they cover up to $10,000 at some point. So it can be a huge opportunity for you, and it can also cut down on costs and improve your margins when looking to go abroad. So just being aware of those things available to you and how that can help you is super important. So next, we'll talk about market entry strategy. These are different ways that you can go about entering into a foreign market. As you can see, I've kind of lined them up on this graph here. So on the left, we have the most indirect way of exporting, which means that there's a lower level of control of your product once it leaves your facilities. But that also means that there's a low amount of investment, so lower risk that you're investing into that market, but which could also turn into lower profit. So depending on your business and what you want to get out of exporting, if this is just a trial run, if this is something you want to invest more in, and you see the market for your good transitioning elsewhere, maybe you want to do something more along the right side that's more directly involved in these foreign markets. It all sort of depends. And so we'll briefly go through each of them really quickly just to kind of give you an idea of where they are on the scale. So indirect exporting is basically working within the US to get your goods abroad. You're actually selling your goods to another, not selling, but you're actually sending your goods abroad through another company. So you're contracting another company to take your goods and sell them abroad. It's obviously very low investment. You don't have to take as much consideration on your bandwidth, your capability as a business to maintain those higher sales. And it's not as, risky in that sense. So on one hand, that's really good if it's your first time, or you don't know if you have bandwidth to sustain this for a long time. That could be something to, use as an outlet to get your goods abroad. But at the same time, if this is a part of your grander strategy for your business as you move forward and think about the long term, it may not be the best just because you don't have any level of control. Like once your goods are sent to this third party, they totally dictate how your product will be perceived in that foreign market. So you don't have say in things like marketing, who you're selling to, how much is going where and at what price points. And again, in terms of profit potential, they'll also be taking a cut of those profits as they're the one who's doing the work and selling things for you. So that's indirect exporting, and that's why it's on the left-hand side of the scale. Direct exporting is just you directly reaching out, whether it be B2B or B2C, directly reaching out to those customers abroad and working with them to ship those products. And then licensing and franchising. So this is more investment just because you're basically selling your rights or your way of doing business to someone abroad in that foreign market to do business under your name, sort of. So, franchising means that you're allowing another person to duplicate your business in another location, and licensing is when you allow someone else to sell your products in that foreign market. They're more investment just because they're in those actual markets. But I guess it would be similar kind of on the scale with direct exporting because it is less investment, just in the sense that you personally are not doing the business over there, but and then on the same time you are receiving royalties and money for allowing those businesses to operate under your name with your products, things like that. So the profit potential is still relatively high. Joint venture, it's exactly what it sounds. It's partnering with a company in that foreign market and starting a business there. You see, it's not very common with smaller businesses. It's something that, I think I've seen more with, bigger businesses that are looking to establish a stronger presence in the foreign market, but it is something that is possible. And then direct investment is just completely investing in a whole market, buying property or starting up an office in that location, hiring staff there, and operating within that space. At this point, you're really not exporting at that point since you've invested all this money and capital in the actual place. So you'd be treated as, another business within that market, and you are just operating under those regulations and compliance measures as well. And yeah, again, this all just depends on what your goal is and what you want to get out of exporting, where you are as a business. So moving on. So payment methods, something that you'll need to be aware of when you're discussing your sales terms with your client once you've made those sales for exporting. So again, I have another graph here to kind of show the scale of investment on each type. And it's basically a complete inverse effect for both the exporter and importer. So like the least risky for the exporter would obviously be the most risky for the importer and vice versa. And the options that we see mostly are open account. So, giving terms to the seller and receiving payment 30, 60, 90 days after they've received the goods. On one end, that's super good for the importer, but for exporters, it's the most risky because you are sending your goods and we won't be receiving payment on those for 1, 2, 3 months later. On the other hand, we have cash in advance, so that's receiving the money up front before you even ship the goods out, having that money secured in your cash flow before sending those goods out. Again, best for the exporter, but not so good for the importer. And then we have two kind of in the middle that kind of they're more costly because you're involving a third party and it's more structured in that sense. So it's safe for both parties in the sense that, you're involving that third party and they're kind of dictating when payment goes out. So letters of credit, you would open, the seller would open up a letter of credit with their bank, and you would, coordinate with your bank as well to sort of create certain terms and conditions that need to be met for payment to go out. So you're getting, legal aspects involved, and you're working with your bank, so it's a very structured process again. So you know that when you ship your good, if XYZ is met from the letter of credit contract, the bank from your seller will release those funds into your bank account. So it's it's a surefire way of knowing that you'll get paid, but at the same time, it is, costly, just in the sense that you're involving that third party. There are those legal fees and transaction fees that need to go into that, setting up the contract and things like that. But it's definitely the safer option again for both parties, because you both know what is needed to, fulfill your side of the deal, and then also, make sure you get your product or you get your payment. Documentary collection is very similar. It's a little less expensive just because it's less legal and transaction fees, just because the difference is that with the letter of credit, you have all the requirements lined out for you, and if you don't complete them, then there's consequences. But the documentary collection is basically opened on one side through the exporter, and if those are met, if everything is met on that side, the seller can choose to then pay you or not. So there's more discretion and more autonomy on the seller side. So it's a little less, reliable as a letter of credit for the exporter, but it's also less costly. So it's just something to take in consideration. For first-time exporters, I think a lot of people think that they're going to have to, take cash in advance. They don't know really how to operate in the foreign market, and just to be sure, they want to, take cash in advance just to be sure. They don't have the money to, do a letter of credit. But what we found through exporting is that, at the end of the day, the most important thing is to be able to have a good or product or service that's, competitive in that market. So if you're only asking for cash in advance, that kind of loses that competitive edge, on top of, the duties and extra added cost of shipping your good abroad. So we really advise to think of ways to be able to offer some sort of open account. And we'll go through resources that the government and other banks provide to do that. So we have, export credit insurance, making sure that you have your goods are insured to have more safety, and know that no matter what, you will get paid for the goods that you sent out. And that can kind of help you stay more competitive in that market. Letters of credit and documentary collection, like I said, they're very safe, and something that, especially if you're working with a buyer that you haven't normally worked for, maybe in the start of the relationship, it's good to think about. But for the long term, you always want to think about how you can get to that open account and kind of cut out those legal and transaction fees, and build a strong and trusting relationship with your foreign buyer. So as you move forward, you might start with a letter of credit, but slowly, transition out, look into, export credit options, and kind of end in sort of an open account to kind of stay competitive, and keep things more efficient and effective in terms of payment. Again, just things to consider. And moving on, so transportation methods, also something that I just wanted to cover, just because there are more options when you're trying to go abroad. It's not just road. Sometimes that's not feasible. If you're no longer, shipping just to the Americas, North or South or Central America, within the Western Hemisphere, you also have you also need to take into consideration ocean options and airway options. Certain things, in terms of type and size of shipment, need to be taken in consideration. If it's a very large shipment, ocean will be your best. It's by far, the cheapest in theory. I know today container costs are, on the rise and incredibly expensive, but, in theory, ocean is better for much larger shipments at lower costs, but they're also the most time consuming. So taking into consideration how fast you need to get your product to X location and what would be the most cost efficient. Air is by far the fastest, but it's also by far the most expensive. But it's also the most secure in that sense as well. So also taking into consideration that. So if you're exporting high quality and very expensive goods, it might be worth it to look into exporting by air, just to make sure that your goods arrive safely and intact and there's less probability of theft. And yeah, but then also, with air, it's again the most expensive, but the most safe. But also there are certain restrictions that go into it. So, highly flammable goods with high toxicity, and things like that. Highly flammable goods, they're not going to be allowed to go on air. So you have to kind of factor that in and think about, okay, air is not going to work. I need to get my products here in X amount of time. How much far ahead do I need to think about shipping my goods via ocean if I'm going to make this work? Again, just taking into consideration all the options you have, and taking into consideration these aspects of the shipment, type of shipment, the value, the cost, and the time constraints that go into each one. Next, we have export documents. So obviously each shipment is different and it will depend on what you're exporting. You might need a license or a certain certificate to comply with, either, again, US Customs or the foreign market, or any product assurance quality certifications that you may need. But generally, I just wanted to cover some of the basic export documents that really go into a shipment. So first we have the pro forma invoice. So this is an international price quotation. You get an inquiry from a buyer and you send them a quote on what a possible purchase order would look like, and kind of negotiate based off that. Has the price of goods, type of shipment, sales terms. It's the original export document basically, and the rest of the export documents will sort of derive for this pro forma invoice. So for example, you send that over and they confirm, and then so the next thing to do would be to send a commercial invoice, and this is the actual purchase order, outlining everything that will be sent over. This is super important as well, and it's also a good idea, to have that commercial invoice available, obviously in English, but then also in the national language of where your product is being sent. Again, this is all going to go through the customs once it reaches the point of entry, and the customs people at that port of entry are going to be using the commercial invoice to, determine the amount of duty that's going to be need to be paid, and if they comply with everything that all the regulations in their market. So making sure that you're making it easy for them to process your goods, the better for you. You would hate to go through all this work just for your goods to, get stopped at the point of entry and delayed and not receive payment on time and things like that. So making sure you just comply with everything on that side. Next, we have export declaration. This is done online on a site called AES. It's run by the CBP, the Customs Border Patrol, and it's basically all the information on your goods. It's just a way for the US to monitor and track exports. It's something for us logistically on the US side to kind of have some sort of record of what's going in and out and where. Usually when you're working, especially when you're working for a freight forwarder, they will take care of this for you, but it's always good to be aware of it, just because, at the end of the day, if there's any sort of discrepancy or problems with your shipment, you're ultimately going to be responsible. So just being aware of, everything that's going into the process and why. So that's the export declaration. And same thing with the, as I've been mentioning about customs at the foreign port of entry, usually your seller, the buyer in the foreign market will be well aware and take care of a lot of the things that are happening on that side as well. But, ultimately, if there was any sort of discrepancy with the documents, there's some problem at that port of entry with the customs, you are ultimately going to be responsible as well into making sure that's getting taken care of. So again, just something to be aware of and to know, even though you may not be directly handling it when it comes time to actually ship your products. On the bottom, we have the bill of lading or airway bill of lading, depending on which mode of transportation you use to send your product, and the packing list. These are transportation documents, and these kind of outline everything regarding the shipment, what's getting shipped on which mode of transportation, how much, the weight, the price, and everything. Again, just to make sure everything lines up and complies with, the commercial invoice and the pro forma quotation. People will be checking to make sure those line up and those are aligned. So just being aware of where those are and when you receive those is super important. Also, for example, if you were to take part in a letter of credit, the bill of lading is super important to making sure, when those transfers of goods happen and when the payment will be reimbursed to you. So making sure that is within your export documents when they arrive at port is super important. And then lastly, we have the certificate of origin. So, this is just the certificate stating that these goods were made in the US, at least X amount was made and produced here in the US. It's really beneficial, especially if you are working with, free trade agreements. So the US currently has around 20 free trade agreements in main markets. I'm sure you've heard of, the USMCA, the free trade agreement we have with Canada and Mexico. We have one with Central America called CAFTA, and we have a lot of different individual free trade agreements as well. So those are also something to really take into consideration because, they usually amount to very low to no tariffs, and they make trade and exporting a lot easier between these two countries. And to become eligible for it, you do need a certificate of origin. So something that's super important to have and something to take consideration when you're trying to be strategic about where you're going and how you're going to sell in that market. Obviously, with little to no tariffs, you can be more competitive with the local producers in that area and overall be more profitable. So again, just to be aware. So that is export documents. And those are all the main points that I want to cover in terms of the export process and plan. Obviously, we couldn't get into everything due to time, but we're going to transition now and kind of talk about, again, those resources that I keep mentioning, focusing more on the government resources. As I said, those are the ones that are more geared toward smaller businesses, and oftentimes they are provided at little to no cost to you. So the main one on the federal level, we have the U.S. Commercial Service. They are located all around the country and all over the world. They have hundreds of offices everywhere, and they just are really here to help facilitate exporting activity. So, our foreign trade offices, they have a really good idea of that local market of where they're stationed. They can give us really detailed due diligence information on not only the business climate in that market, but if you have an inquiry from a potential buyer, they can do the due diligence from that market and kind of get a good idea of who you're dealing with. Certain distributors and resellers and partners, they are aware of them in that market, and they can give you, a really good insight onto who you're doing business with. On the state side, more local, again, I had mentioned we also have state offices here around the globe that are specifically for Illinois businesses. They provide, matchmaking services, partnering you up with potential clients and organizing virtual meetings and things like that. They also organize different trade shows. So, there are always a high variety of different trade shows that are going on in the world, and it's obviously quite expensive and definitely an investment, but it's much easier when you have a state office like OTI that goes out and buys, part of a pavilion and has booths readily available to you to kind of just help it streamline the process and help you kind of navigate that space, especially if you're a new exporter. It's really helpful in that sense. And they also offer financial aid opportunities, and we'll talk about that a little later. I think I had mentioned it before, the ISTEP. It's the the Illinois State Trade Expansion Program. So it's a reimbursement program to help kind of fund trade expansion activities for businesses that are looking to grow their business in the realm of exporting. And then we have the local offices. So that would be the ITCs, what I do, the International Trade Centers. We're sort of the boots on the ground that are going out and talking with businesses, helping them curate a export plan, helping them assess their export readiness, kind of the things that I've been talking about. And then just also getting the context of how that applies to their business specifically to kind of help them better navigate this space of, export assistant resources. Like I've said, there are a ton of different resources, private, public, commercial, whatnot. And it's really almost to a point where it's kind of hard to navigate that space and know where you need to go and when. So that's also something that we can help with as well. And yeah, as I said, we're 10 of us here in the state of Illinois. If one of us doesn't have the answer, we are part of this huge network where we can definitely find that for you. Collectively, we just have, decades and decades of experience in international sales and exporting. So definitely a realm of knowledge for you and your business. So that is more of the government resources in terms of, advising, due diligence, and research. I just wanted to also touch on some options that they have for export funding. So making sure like, how are you going to get funds to fulfill these export transactions? How are you going to be the most cost efficient about it? And just know that there are certain loans and different programs that are available to you to kind of help ease that process. So we'll start with the Small Business Administration. The Small Business Administration is a federal government agency that provides support to entrepreneurs and small businesses. So, under the SBA, that would mean, a company under 500 employees. And they work with commercial banks to kind of set up certain programs like the one I'm about to mention. They have these SBA loans that they give to small businesses. And I say loan very loosely. They are not actually supplying you with loans to help, increase export activity. It's a guarantee. So basically, they work with commercial banks to provide a guarantee on your loan. So a lot of times commercial banks are very hesitant to give loans to especially, small businesses that are looking to export, maybe especially first time exporting, maybe they're not as seasoned as other businesses. So this kind of helps small businesses have that security and be more susceptible to getting accepted for a loan. So basically, you work with the SBA to get this guarantee, and then with your bank, you work to get a certain loan. And then the SBA, basically what that guarantee does is they will cover, up to 90% of that loan if you're not able to make payment, making it less risky for the bank, and then therefore making it more likely that they will, approve your loan. So yeah, they have three, and it's all depending on, the amount you need and how fast you need it. So the Export Express loan is something that you can get within 36 hours. You can get that approved really fast. It's sort of fast cash to help fund certain activities such as trade show participation, specific small scale export orders, equipment purchases, and inventory for real estate acquisition. Although it's not so common, it is possible. But if you're really thinking about developing real estate, you might want to look into a more long-term loan where you can get more money. Since the Export Express loan is quite fast, there is a max loan of $500,000, so it's not as much. Moving down, we have Export Working Capital loan. So it's exactly what it sounds. It's a loan for working capital, so short-term working capital, whether it be raw materials, equipment, machinery, anything that's needed to help you be able to increase the bandwidth and your capability to fill more purchase orders for exporting. And then international trade loan. The international trade loan is more long-term working capital equipment. This is where you see a lot more land and building acquisition, debt refinancing, etc. I have a breakdown of these on this next slide, so you can kind of get a better picture. And as Stella had mentioned, we'll be sending out a recording of this webinar as well as the slides, so you'll have all this information available to you. Like I said, it really breaks down and differentiates based on how fast you need it and how much. So again, the express loan is very fast. It takes around 36 hours to get approved, but because of that, there are kind of more restrictions. So you only can take out 500,000, and they'll guarantee 90% if it's less than 350, and then if it's over, only 75%. As you work your way over, they cap out at 5 million. They'll for sure cover around 90% of those costs, and those are more standard. So, and they're not as fast. They usually take about 1 to 2 weeks, but again, it's very beneficial when working with commercial banks to ensure that you can lower the risk for them and have that likelihood of getting approved. Next, we have the Export-Import Bank, or Exim Bank. It's the official export credit agency of the United States, and it's wholly owned by the federal government and assists in financing and facilitating, exports of goods and services. Much like the SBA, they have a similar loan guarantee, similar concept. They're not actually providing the loan; they're guaranteeing a certain percentage of your loan. So, commercial banks are more likely to work with you. And they help, fund similar things, raw materials, equipment, land acquisition, supplies, funding labor if you need to expand your workforce to compensate for the increased orders of coming abroad. The only difference between this and the SBA loan is obviously you don't need to be a small business. And then I don't believe there's a cap, so there's not that $5 million limit, $5 million limit. And yeah, I should also mention that the Exim has a ton of different programs. I just wanted to focus more on the two kind of more general, covers all types of businesses, programs that you can benefit from, but they have a lot of, export financing programs that are really niche to certain industries. If you are, selling food or agriculture, there's a specific program for that, as well as just, we're just going to cover the basic programs. So along with the working capital loan guarantee, there's also the export credit insurance. And that's kind of what I was kind of hinting at when I was talking about, ensuring that if your client defaults and is unable to make payment, that you will still receive, some sort of payment for the goods that you had shipped. So it's an insurance policy for your foreign account receivable, specifically for that, and provides protection against risk of non-payment. So not only are you, reducing the risk for yourself, but you're also, increasing your competitiveness in that foreign market because you are securing a certain percentage of your product. You can, be more inclined to offer better credit terms, or even, an open account in general for that foreign buyer, making it, more lucrative for them, and a better opportunity for you as well. So how it works, basically, the policy cover both commercial and political losses for up to 95%. There's no application fee for it, and it's a one-time, refundable advance deposit. I think it's $500 is what is required to issue the policy, and premiums are paid no later than 30 days after the month of payment. And finally, we'll dig a little bit deeper into ISTEP. Again, what I mentioned before, it's something that's provided by the state, the Office of Trade and Investment. And it's basically created to reimburse businesses that are looking to invest in trade expansion activity. I believe it's one of the only grant opportunities for for-profit businesses. So again, this is a grant. It's something that you don't need to pay back, but it is a reimbursement grant. So you'll basically apply for it, get approved, and attend that trade show or invest in that certain activity, submit your receipts, and then you'll receive, up to 75% of that cost reimbursed to you. It covers a wide variety of different trade expansion activities, group trade missions. Those are what I had mentioned earlier. The trade missions that are held and hosted by the Office of Trade and Investment, they sort of buy out a pavilion and invite Illinois businesses to partake. You can also go on an individual foreign sales mission, localize your website. So if you are, looking to get your website translated in Spanish or a different language, or market your product differently based on how consumers in that foreign market go about online shopping, you can get part of that service reimbursed if you're looking to localize your website. And then product certification. So it also covers costs for example, if you need to get the CE mark to be eligible to sell your product in Europe, part of that cost can also be reimbursed through this program. And yeah, it's very, again, it's very beneficial to you. Again, this is something that you do not need to pay back. And it's also a good way to, meet potential customers, create more demand and things like that. The whole point of this program is to be able to have, Illinois businesses more involved in exporting and getting more opportunities to do that. So, yeah, we have the requirements, I think, in this next slide. So the only thing that's needed to apply are these following things. You have to be an Illinois company, a small business, again, so that means 500 people or less, and be operational within at least a year. The minimum profits is $250,000 in annual revenue. And then the actual good itself needs to be 51% based US material and 25% Illinois. On the application, they will have some questions that you'll need to answer just to kind of gauge your seriousness in exporting. Have you really thought this through? Have you worked with your management to confirm that this is something that you are going to be invested in? And we here at the ITC can really help you do that. We sit down with businesses all the time and kind of go through the applications. It's kind of lengthy, and we kind of help them go about strategizing. Like I said, we go through the export readiness, global business plan. And there's actually a spot on the application itself to say that if you had been working with one of us, and it just kind of shows, that you have really invested time and are serious about exporting. And then lastly, you just cannot be applying or receiving for any other grants associated for export promotion assistance. I think before I move on, I should also mention the amount. So I forgot to mention, sorry about that. For trade shows, either group trade mission or individual sales missions, the ISTEP can cover up to $7,500 worth of it. And, that includes anything from the booth fee if you're doing, an individual foreign sales mission. If you're doing for a group trade mission, the booth and matchmaking services are usually covered by the state. And that also includes airfare, accommodation, transportation from your hotel to the event, things like that, that can all be reimbursed under this program. For website localization, I think the cap is up to 6,000. And then actually website localization, we just upped that. The OTI just notified us that they have upped that amount to 10,000, and product certification is still at around 6,000. So definitely worth it. Definitely something that you should look into if you're thinking about investing in any of these activities. So that is ISTEP. And then lastly, just one more time, the Illinois International Trade Centers are also available to help with a variety of different things. All of our counseling and advising sessions are at no cost to you and remain confidential. So if you're trying to be strategic about entering a market in Mexico and you sell dog food, if I work with another company that's also looking to do the same, I can't tell them any information or tell them anything about how you plan about going about your business. We also help with, again, assessing export readiness assessment, going through trade financing options, compliance. So what is needed to get that dog food to Mexico? What are the certain specific regulations you need to work with the FDA? It's going to be consumed. How do you go about doing that? We can do that research for you. And yeah, any aspect about the export plan development, we are able to assist. And we also hold educational webinars such as this one as well. Again, my name is Alyssa Swartzer. I'm the International Trade Center Director here at the Greater Southwest Development Corporation. I just wanted to leave my contact information in case anyone had any further questions or anything that's specific to their business and want to talk on a one-on-one basis. And I'll leave that here. Again, everyone will be receiving a copy of the slides and recording, so you'll have all this information. And yeah, thank you so much for coming. And now we'll open it up to any questions that may have come in through the chat. And I don't know, Stella, if you can see the chat, because
So far, I don't see any questions.
Okay,
I'm looking in the
perfect.
Q&A box. There are no questions in the Q&A box. Let me check the chat box again.
Okay.
No questions. I would say that's a good thing. That means everyone,
Yeah.
all the information was clear and everyone understood it.
Right. And again, as I had said before, if there's any personal like business questions, feel free to reach out to me on email or call, and I'm always available to talk as well. So there's always that option as well.
We can wait like probably another minute. Let's see what
Okay.
happens.
No problem.
Okay, we have two questions that came in the Q&A box.
Okay.
Well, actually, one. I'm looking for e-businesses that sell online in the US and are in a process of expanding their sales to Europe. My role will be to help them set up warehousing for their stock in Europe and coordinate the picking, packing, and shipping of their merchandise to the European clients. Can you think of any businesses that may find this partnership useful?
So they're in Europe and looking to help establish distributing networks in Europe for Illinois businesses, correct? That's the way I understood it. And I mean, I can't, give any information about specific businesses on here. As I mentioned, everything that I do in terms of client are, confidential. But if that is a service that you are looking to expand and help as be a resource for Illinois businesses, I'd be happy to, meet with you on a one-on-one basis to kind of get more of an idea of what you do and what services you can provide. And that could be something that, a tool in my toolbox when I'm looking to help, businesses that are looking to expand into Europe. So I would say definitely reach out to me if that's something that, if I understood that right, and we can go from there.
Okay, let's see, can we get some more questions to come in? Looks like we have another question that came in. Oh, no, they just said thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's give them another 2 minutes. Let's see what happens. Okay, looks like we don't have any more questions. So again, if you are a part of the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program and would like to receive, oh, wait a minute. Here's a question. Your, do you have any advice on how to start an exporting business?
Yeah, so if you're a business that is new to exporting 100%, have not done that before in any regard, kind of what I was touching on before, it's really important to take that time to really assess your export readiness. And I really say that as like a formal process, like have that be something that you take the time to sit down and talk about, maybe write it out to kind of really plan and see if you're really capable of doing so. Like I'd mentioned, there's a ton of different templates to kind of follow through to make sure you're touching every aspect and writing it out. So, management commitment, looking at your products, where's the demand coming from, how much are you aware of your certain market, etc. So, yeah, starting there with the expert readiness assessment, really taking that time to self-reflect on your position as a business, how you want that to fit into your long-term plan as a business, and then go from there. And then you can start, doing your international market research, trying to find clients there. But before all of that, it's really important to kind of take this first step. And again, as I had mentioned, this is something that we here at the International Trade Center really specialize in, working with first-time businesses that are looking to export and sitting down with them and making sure that they have really talked through every aspect of that readiness assessment and then going from there and kind of basing off all of your further investment and time off that assessment. So that's what I would say is the most important when you're trying to get into this realm for the first time.
I want to export dolls to Australia. Do you help with that? Any researches?
Yeah, so we can help with that. So I don't know, I would love to learn more about, why Australia, making sure that this is, the best market for you. If there's any other further market research we can do within Australia, again, kind of what I had mentioned before, honing in on that, certain demographic and area within Australia, if that's something that you need help with. If you're thinking more of help along the lines of what are the regulations and compliance that's needed to send dolls over, or there are certain trademark or patents that are needed, we can also look into that as well. If it's a matter of, you've done all the research and you're looking to go into Australia, it's just a matter of finding those clients. We can also put you in contact, with people that are there. Like I mentioned, we have a lot of different trade offices, and the U.S. Commercial Service has multiple in Australia, and we can get you in contact with them to kind of, find vetted certain distributors and buyers and maybe work on getting some matchmaking services. So finding some meetings with potential clients that may be beneficial to you. So the answer is yes. It just kind of depends on where you are in that process and how we can assist you from there. So yeah, feel free to reach out. As I mentioned, I have my contact information in the slides.
That person said thank you and they will reach out to you.
Perfect.
Okay, well, let's try the exit again. So
Okay.
far, no more questions. Are you guys sure you don't have any more questions before
Last
we
call.
end today's webinar? Okay. If you are a part of the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program and would like to receive credit for today's webinar, please send an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. Again, to receive credit for today's webinar, please send an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. To learn more about our upcoming webinars, please visit chicago.gov/business education. If you are in the downtown area today, join us for the Food Truck Fest at Daily Plaza from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. This is a way of supporting small businesses here in the city of Chicago. We have a webinar, an expo, a small business expo, remote expo, scheduled for Thursday, October 21st. To find out more about that, please visit our website at chicago.gov/BACP. Thank you, Alicia, for this wonderful presentation, and thank you to all of our attendees. Everyone go out and have a safe weekend.
Yes, thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.